Shoot a photo in near darkness and you're probably losing the whole shot to grain, because of one thing almost nobody sees. Your phone stacks 15 dark, noisy frames into one bright, clean night photo. Here's the obvious fix that fails. Just hold the shutter open longer to let more light in. But your hands shake, cars and people move, and the whole frame smears into blur. And a phone's light sensor is tiny, smaller than your fingernail, so it starves for light in the dark. So how does a phone beat an older camera with a bigger lens? The answer isn't better glass. It's software. Start with the real enemy, noise. Light comes in tiny packets called photons. In bright daylight, millions of them flood each pixel on the sensor, so the image is strong and certain. In near darkness, only a handful reach each pixel. That's the problem. When so little real light arrives, the sensor's own random electrical hiss becomes loud compared to the actual scene. You've seen the result. Colored specks, grainy fuzz, blotches that shift every time you look. That hiss is noise. Think of it like a whisper in a loud room. In daylight, the scene shouts and you hear it clearly. At night, the scene whispers and the room's static drowns it out. Engineers measure this as signal-to-noise ratio, real signal versus random junk. At night, that ratio collapses, so you can't trust any single pixel in one dark frame. Is that speck a star, a colored light, or just the sensor guessing? In one short frame, you genuinely cannot tell. This is exactly why a normal night snapshot looks grainy and dim. It isn't a broken camera. There simply wasn't enough clean light in that one shot to build a trustworthy picture. One frame is one whisper, and one whisper isn't enough. So here's the first move that fixes it. Instead of one long, blurry shot, the phone fires off a burst. About 15 quick frames, each roughly a tenth of a second. Each single frame is still dark. Each one is still noisy. But because each one is so fast, nothing has time to move. No blurs. Your hand can shake all it wants in a tenth of a second, and the frame stays frozen sharp. A car crossing the street barely budges in that slice of time. Now add up what you captured. 15 frames at a tenth of a second each is a second and a half of total light collected. The same amount a long exposure would gather. But you never asked your hand to hold still for a second and a half. You broke that impossible request into 15 easy ones. That's the trick, and it's worth saying plainly. Total light adds up like one long exposure, but it's split into pieces short enough to freeze motion. So you get the light of a long shot with the sharpness of a fast one. But wait, you now have 15 separate dark, noisy photos sitting in memory. Each one alone is still a grainy mess you'd never post. Collecting the light was only half the job. So how do 15 bad frames become one good one? That's where the real math begins. Now the payoff move, stacking. The phone lines up all 15 frames, and for each tiny spot in the picture, it averages that spot across every frame. 15 values for one pixel averaged into one. Here's why that quietly works: a small miracle. The real light in the scene, that street lamp, that wall, sits in the same place with the same brightness in every single frame. It's consistent. Average 15 consistent values and you get that same value back, clean and strong. The noise behaves in the exact opposite way. It's random. A pixel that's too bright from hiss in frame 1 is too dark in frame 2, off in a different direction in frame 3. Average all that random up and down and it drags towards zero. It cancels itself out. So the true image reinforces while the noise erases. Signal stays, junk fades. And the payoff isn't small. Noise drops roughly with the square root of how many frames you stack. 15 frames, the square root of 15 is close to 4, so you cut the grain by about 4 times. Say that again, 4 times less noise just from averaging 15 shots. That is the whole reason grain turns into a clean, bright image. Not a better sensor, just the same faint scene measured 15 times, with the errors voting themselves out of the picture. 15 whispers lined up finally become a clear voice. But I've been assuming those frames line up perfectly. On a handheld phone, they don't. Here's the wrinkle nobody warns you about. Averaging only works if every frame lines up exactly. But you shot these by hand. Between frame 1 and frame 15, the phone drifted. A millimeter here, a slight tilt there. So the street lamp isn't at the same spot in every frame. Average those raw, unaligned frames and you don't get a clean photo. You get a smeared ghost because you average the lamp with the empty sky next to it. So before any averaging happens, the software plays matchmaker. It picks out sharp landmarks, a window corner, the edge of a sign, and finds that same corner in all 15 frames. Then it gently shifts and warps each frame until every landmark stacks right on top of its twin. Edges line up. Now and only now does it average. But there's a harder case. What about things that actually moved? A passing car, a walking person, they're in a different real place in each frame. Line them up and they'd either smear into a blur or duplicate into 15 faint copies. So the software hunts for those moving patches, walls them off, and handles them on their own, often keeping a single sharp frame for the mover instead of averaging it. The still world gets the full 15-frame cleanup. The moving world gets protected from it. Two different rules, one final frame. So the phone isn't just averaging. It's aligning the whole scene, then deciding region by region what's holding still and what isn't. That's a lot of judgment for something that feels like one tap. So here's the whole machine start to finish. You tap once, the phone fires 15 dark, noisy frames, each fast enough to freeze your shaky hands. Software finds matching landmarks and warps every frame until they line up, while walling off anything that moved. Then it averages each pixel across all 15. The real scene, steady in every frame, reinforces itself and brightens. The random noise, different every frame, cancels toward nothing. 15 unusable frames collapse into one bright, clean photo. And here's the idea that ties it all together. You were never going to hold a phone perfectly still for a long, bright exposure. That shot was impossible. So the phone doesn't take it. Instead, it takes 15 easy shots that were always possible and rebuilds the impossible one with math. That's the punchline. The bright night photo on your screen was never actually captured by the camera. No single frame ever looked like it. The final image was computed, assembled from a stack of dark ones. That's computational photography. The picture is a calculation, not a snapshot. So the next time your phone pulls a bright, sharp shot out of near total darkness, you know the secret. It isn't a better lens. It's 15 dark frames plus math stacked into one. Curious how your phone decides what's a face and quietly brightens it while it's at it? That's the same computational trick. Subscribe and we'll open that box next.